when outrage gets selective. The unbelievable take. Let me say something that still shocks me. There are people in this country, many on the far left, who are outraged at the United States for opposing a corrupt strongman, but strangely silent about the suffering that strongman caused. Nicolas Maduro didn't inherit a crisis, he created one. Millions fled Venezuela, the economy collapsed, elections became theater, dissent became dangerous. Yet somehow, when the U.S. applies pressure, sanctions, indictments, diplomatic isolation, the outrage suddenly points here instead of there. Here's what I don't understand. When did opposing authoritarianism become imperialism? When did calling out corruption become bullying? And when did America become the villain for not looking the other way? You don't have to love U.S. foreign policy. You don't have to trust Washington. But if your moral compass only spins when America acts and goes silent when dictators steal elections, you're not standing for justice. You're standing for a narrative. The real issue beneath the argument. Here's the deeper problem. Some people don't actually hate corruption. They hate who points it out. They don't oppose authoritarianism. They oppose the idea that America might be right, even once. So they lower the bar for dictators and raise it impossibly high for their own country. Let me be clear. America is flawed. Its history is messy. Its power should always be questioned. But if the rule becomes America is always wrong, then tyranny gets a free pass, as long as it wears the right ideological label. And the people who pay the price aren't politicians. They're citizens, families, children. Standing against corruption shouldn't be partisan. Standing for free elections shouldn't be controversial. And caring about human suffering shouldn't depend on who's holding the microphone. If your outrage is selective, your principles aren't principles, they're preferences. When morality depends on who's speaking instead of what's happening, truth becomes optional. The sudden outrage problem. Here's where the outrage gets exposed. A lot of Democrats are furious now, not because of what was done, but because of who did it. When the U.S. government placed indictments on Nicolas Maduro, when it imposed crushing sanctions, when it offered massive financial rewards for his arrest. There was no marching in the streets, no emergency press conferences, no cries of constitutional crisis. That all happened before, under Democratic leadership, including the Joe Biden administration. But the moment Donald Trump makes a decisive move using the same executive authority presidents have relied on for decades, suddenly it's dangerous, reckless, and un-American. That's not principle. That's partisanship. You don't get to support indictments, bounties, sanctions, and regime pressure, then pretend to be shocked when a president actually acts on them. If the objection is truly about executive power, then where was the outrage when Democrats expanded it? If the objection is about legality, then why didn't they object when the charges were filed? The truth is uncomfortable for some people. They weren't against the policy. They were against the person. And when opposition becomes personal instead of principled, consistency disappears and credibility goes with it. Let's be clear about what actually happened. In a dramatic military operation, U.S. forces captured Nicolas Maduro and brought him to the United States to face long-standing drug and weapons charges. Now ask yourself this: why would President Trump order something this bold? Here's the logic he laid out, and it's consistent with his worldview. Maduro wasn't just a foreign leader. The U.S. government had accused him of running an authoritarian regime tied to narcotics trafficking and violence that spilled into American streets. Months of pressure and sanctions hadn't forced Maduro out. Diplomacy and economic tools had failed to produce change. Trump saw inaction as worse than action, letting a regime alleged to harm Americans continue unchecked. Under U.S. law and presidential powers, a president can order military action without prior congressional approval when acting as commander-in-chief on matters of national defense and foreign threats. That's rooted in decades of accepted practice. Presidents have used force without full congressional war declarations when they judge immediate action necessary for U.S. security interests. Trump argued that traditional diplomacy had been exhausted and that decisive action was required to bring a long-accused criminal to justice and disrupt the networks tied to him. Whether you agree with the strategy or not, the choice wasn't arbitrary. It was calculated under a belief that something bigger was at stake than politics. The Democrats, the Biden administration, and the bounty on Maduro. Let's address a part of this story that often gets lost in the headlines. The bounty the U.S. government placed on Nicolas Maduro's head, and how Democrats responded before Trump's military operation. Back in January 2025, the Joe Biden administration raised the U.S. reward for information leading to Maduro's arrest to $25 million. The State Department framed it as part of sustained pressure and solidarity with the Venezuelan people against an illegitimate and re-elected dictator. Later that year, the reward was increased again under a bipartisan U.S. government effort, doubling it to $50 million, making it the largest reward the U.S. has ever offered for a foreign head of state. But here's the political twist. Some Democrats used that bounty as a symbolic statement, showing they wanted Maduro held accountable without endorsing military action. Republicans, like Senator Marco Rubio, pointed out that while Democrats criticized Trump's capture mission, they had supported, or at least did not oppose, the earlier reward and long-standing indictments. Critics on the left argued the bounty was political theater, an incentive on paper, but not backed by meaningful action. Meanwhile, some Democratic leaders avoided overt praise for the military operation itself, emphasizing concerns about legality and congressional oversight, even as they supported the underlying goal of holding Maduro responsible. So the situation boiled down to this. Biden's team increased the reward, signaling U.S. condemnation of Maduro and a desire for accountability. Many Democrats criticized Trump's unilateral military move, saying action of that scale should involve Congress, even if they agreed with the objective of justice. Republicans countered that Democrats had offered rhetoric and a bounty, but didn't actually get the job done until Trump's decisive action. In other words, Democrats under Biden did put financial pressure on Maduro, but they stopped short of military enforcement, and that became a central point in the political debate about purpose versus execution. Executive power, used by every president, feared only when Trump uses it. Here's the reality no one wants to say out loud. Executive power in foreign affairs didn't start with Trump. It didn't even start in this century. Presidents from Barack Obama to Joe Biden used it, ordering strikes, raids, sanctions, covert actions, and arrests without prior congressional approval. And when they did it, the justification was always the same: speed, secrecy, and national interest. Congress debates, presidents act. That's not a loophole. It's how the Constitution was designed to function in foreign affairs. So why does the alarm only sound when Donald Trump pulls the lever? Because for some people, executive authority isn't the problem. Trump is. They were fine when power was used quietly. They were fine when it was wrapped in softer language. They were fine when it happened overseas and off camera. But when it's decisive, when it's unmistakable, when it doesn't apologize first, suddenly it's called dangerous. That's not a constitutional objection. That's selective fear. You can argue about judgment, You can argue about consequences, but you can't pretend the power is new, and you can't pretend it only became controversial when Trump used it. If executive authority is acceptable sometimes, then be honest enough to say it's acceptable all the time. Otherwise, you're not defending the Constitution, you're defending a double standard. Why it was better for the United States. Now, here's the core of the argument. Some people see this as reckless intervention. Others see it as strategic enforcement of justice and security. Here's why you could say it was better for the United States that Trump did it. 1. It disrupted a long-accused criminal regime. Maduro was indicted by U.S. prosecutors on drug and weapons charges long before this operation. Bringing him to trial sends a signal that U.S. law enforcement will pursue major transnational criminals even when they hide behind power. Second, it reinforced deterrence adversaries study American responses. If U.S. policy looks weak or reactive, it invites further exploitation. Taking decisive action tells other bad actors that there are consequences. Third, it used presidential constitutional authority. The Constitution designates the president as commander-in-chief. Historic precedent shows presidents have ordered military operations, sometimes controversial, without explicit congressional votes when acting on threats or law enforcement operations abroad. This isn't something unique to Trump. It's how the office functions in times of perceived urgency. 4. It shifted the dynamic in the hemisphere. Whether the long-term outcomes are positive remains to be seen, but it forced a change in the status quo in a part of the world where inaction had too often been the default. Others will debate legality in geopolitics, and that debate matters. But in Trump's calculus, waiting for congressional approval or letting Maduro remain untouched was worse for U.S. interests than acting. In that frame, whether you cheer it or question it, the decisive act changed the game and foregrounded American interests with dramatic clarity.